Ever catch yourself scrolling through Instagram, while you're out at dinner with your partner? Or maybe when you're supposed to be enjoying a quiet night in? It's almost become second nature, hasn't it? But have you ever stopped to wonder if this seemingly harmless habit might actually be a slippery slope to some, well, relationship trouble?
It's a question a lot of us have probably pondered at some point.
Right. And today we're really diving deep into this idea. We're going to unpack some fascinating research about how social media, especially Instagram, could be impacting our love lives in ways we might not even realize.
And what makes this particular study, which was recently published in the Social Science Computer Review, so compelling is that it moves beyond those anecdotal stories we've all heard. Like, oh, my cousin's roommate's best friend broke up because of Instagram.
Exactly. It's so easy to get caught up in those individual
It
stories.
is. But this study, it actually delves into some hard data. We're talking about the nitty-gritty of the relationship between Instagram use and, get this, relationship satisfaction.
So, we're talking about more than just a hunch or a feeling. We're looking at actual evidence. But before we jump into all the juicy details, I'm curious, why focus on Instagram specifically? I mean, there's a whole universe of social media out there. Was it just because Instagram is so popular with couples?
That's a great question. And while its popularity is definitely a factor, the real reason has more to do with the data itself. Instagram, you see, has built-in usage tracking.
Ah, so researchers could see exactly how much time people were spending on the app.
Precisely. That makes the data way more reliable than simply asking people to estimate their usage, which, let's face it, can be a little, shall we say, subjective.
That makes total sense. So, what did this really precise data reveal? Is scrolling through Instagram really as detrimental to relationships as some people might suspect?
Well, this study found a pretty strong link. As people's Instagram use increased, their relationship satisfaction tended to decrease. And it wasn't just a small correlation either. We're talking about a statistically significant connection.
Okay, so there's definitely something there. But this is where my brain starts doing backflips. It's not like Instagram itself is inherently bad, right? I mean, it's a tool like any other. So, what's the deal? What's actually driving this downward spiral from excessive scrolling to, as you put it, relationship unhappiness?
Well, that is the million-dollar question. And the good news is this study explores some really compelling possibilities. One of the biggest factors is probably the simplest time. When you're glued to your phone, you're not exactly engaging with your partner in those meaningful ways.
Right. It's like you're there, but you're not really there.
Exactly. You're physically present, maybe, but mentally checked out. And over time, those small, everyday moments of connection, those little smiles, those shared glances, they start to fade. And that lack of presence, that can really start to chip away at the foundation of a relationship.
And it's not like anyone's intentionally trying to disconnect,
Right.
right? It just kind of happens.
It's so subtle. And it goes beyond just time, too. Think about the content on Instagram. We're constantly bombarded with images of seemingly perfect lives, perfectly curated vacations, picture perfect families. It's easy to get sucked into that comparison game.
Oh, tell me about it. I've definitely fallen into that trap. You start comparing your relationship to those perfectly filtered snapshots, and suddenly your own life can feel a little less, well, sparkly?
Exactly. And even when you know logically that it's not real life, those comparisons can really mess with your headspace, fueling those feelings of inadequacy, even resentment. It's like this constant underlying pressure of, am I good enough? Is my relationship good enough? Are we missing out on something amazing?
That fear of missing out, that FOMO, it's real, and it can be so insidious, especially when it seeps into your relationship.
It's like a silent relationship saboteur, whispering doubts and insecurities. And what's even more concerning is that this dissatisfaction, this feeling of not being quite good enough, it doesn't just disappear into thin air. The study found that as relationships out
Conflicts. Arguments.
bingo, it's like this domino effect. You're unhappy, you're more irritable, you're more likely to snap at your partner, and things just keep spiraling downward.
It sounds incredibly disheartening, but there's more to this study, right? Tell me there's light at the end of this tunnel. Please tell me there's hope for us.
Don't worry, it's not all doom and gloom. The study also shed some light on how this negative cycle, this downward spiral, might actually contribute to something we hear a lot about these days:
And that is, don't leave me hanging.
social media addiction.
Okay, now we're getting into some serious territory. Social media addiction. Tell me more about this connection. How does it all fit together?
So it's like turning to Instagram for a little comfort, a little escape from the tension. But in reality, we're just digging ourselves deeper into this hole.
It's almost like self-soothing gone wrong, wouldn't you say? You're trying to make yourself feel better, but the very thing you're turning to for relief is actually contributing to the problem.
It's like, what's that saying? Fighting fire with fire.
Something like that. It's certainly not a sustainable solution.
Okay, so we've painted a pretty bleak picture here. Is there any good news in this study? Should I just throw my phone in the nearest lake and call it a day?
Well, before you go full on digital detox, let's talk about the upside. Because thankfully, this research doesn't end on a completely depressing note. There's a glimmer of hope, a potential way to break free from this negative spiral.
Okay, you've got my attention. Tell me everything. What's the secret to dodging this whole Instagram relationship trap? The study found that couples who made a conscious effort to make small sacrifices for each other tended to report higher levels of relationship satisfaction.
Okay, hold on. Sacrifice sounds a little intense. Are we talking about, like, selling all your possessions and moving to a remote island for love? Because I'm not sure I can make that happen.
Not quite. We're not talking about anything drastic here. It's little things, those everyday acts of consideration that can make a big difference. Think choosing a restaurant your partner loves, even if it's not your top pick. Or maybe staying in to watch their favorite movie instead of going out with friends.
Right, or even just putting your phone down and really listening when they're talking about their day.
Exactly. It's about making those conscious choices that say, hey, you matter to me. And those small gestures, they add up over time.
It's about showing up in those small but meaningful ways. I love
Yeah.
that. So, how does this all tie back to the Instagram thing?
Well, the study found that this increase in relationship satisfaction, this feeling of being valued and appreciated, was linked to a decrease in conflicts and negative experiences within the relationship.
Which makes sense. If you're feeling good about your relationship, you're probably less likely to pick fights or get annoyed with each other.
Right. And here's the kicker. That increase in relationship satisfaction and decrease in conflict was also connected to a reduced likelihood of Instagram addiction.
So, by strengthening our relationships, by making those small sacrifices and being more present for each other, we might actually be less tempted to seek validation and connection in the digital world.
It's like we're fulfilling those needs for connection and validation in the real world, which then makes those digital distractions less appealing, less necessary.
That is fascinating. And it makes you wonder if this goes beyond just romantic relationships, too, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we all have relationships in our lives, friendships, family, even colleagues. Could these same dynamics be at play there?
You're absolutely right, and it's a question worth exploring. Think about how often you might be drawn to that quick scroll through social media when you're with friends or family. Is it possible that those seemingly harmless glances at our phones could be subtly impacting the quality of our interactions with them too?
This has really got me thinking about all those little moments, where we choose to pick up our phone instead of engaging with the people right in front of us. It's so easy to go on autopilot.
It really is, and I think that's the biggest takeaway from all of this. It's not about demonizing social media or swearing off technology altogether. It's about awareness.
Being mindful of how those little choices, those little moments of tuning out, might be impacting our relationships in bigger ways than we realize.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance, that sweet spot where technology enhances our lives without overshadowing the importance of real life connection.
So, as our listeners wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you hope they really take away from this conversation?
That's a good question. I think it boils down to this. The next time you're with someone you care about, whether it's your partner, a friend, a family member, take a moment to really tune in to them, to be present in that moment, and put the phone away, even if it's just for a little while.
Because at the end of the day, it's those real life connections, those genuine moments of shared experience that truly enrich our lives. And on that note, until next time, keep those conversations flowing, both online and off.